Hey friends, I'm Jamie from Forever Cozy Knits, and in this video I'm going to show you step by step how to make this hand knit chunky chenille Christmas blanket. It takes less than 2 hours to make and you don't need any experience or needles, just your hands and some yarn. For this blanket I designed a color chart to help me keep track of how many rows I needed for each color and how many stitches and how much yarn is needed. This is the first pattern in a collection of 12 different Christmas patterns that I have. I'll be covering all the steps and details you need to be able to make this blanket in the tutorial. However, if you are kind of a visual person like me and want to have this visual guide in front of you while you're working, then it's a part of my 12 pattern collection linked down below, so you can print that out and have it with you. Otherwise, let's get started. All right, first things first, let's talk about the materials we're going to need for this blanket. We're going to need yarn and scissors. Those are really the only things that you have to have. Optionally, there's going to be, I'll show you a couple different ways to join the yarn together. You don't have to have anything, but you may need a lighter if you like that method, or thread, and I'll show you that later. As for the yarn, my favorite yarn is Yarn Bee Eternal Bliss. This yarn is found at Hobby Lobby, and every other week it goes on sale for 30% off. So if it's on sale now, grab it. If not, wait till Monday and it'll be on sale. So for this project, I've worked out the pattern to be very efficient with this particular yarn. So we'll have very little waste. We're going to need 4 skeins of the cranberry. So I've got 4 of those here. We're going to need 2 skeins of this forest color. And we're going to need 1 skein of ivory. If you are going to be using a different brand, they'll have different yardages per skein. So you'll need 112 yards of the red color. You'll need 56 yards of the green color and 28 yards of the ivory color. So let's get started. All right, let's open up our first skein of yarn. And these blankets always start out with a foundation chain, and that first loop of the chain will be a slip knot. So let's get some yarn out here, and we'll make our slip knot just a little, not too far from the end, so maybe 8 to 12 inches. We'll make a loop by placing the yarn over itself, and then put that loop back over this working yarn over here. Here's the tail working yarn. Pinch and pull through and pull it tight. This is a slip knot. If you want to see that again, I can just undo it. So again, put the yarn over itself to make a loop. Put your fingers inside the loop and pick up this yarn and then pull it tight. So that's our slip knot. And you can change the size of it by pulling on this end here. Pull it through. So for our foundation chain, we're going to want our loops to be about 4 fingers in size. So we can use our fingers to kind of gauge the loops and keep them consistent throughout the blanket. So for this foundation chain, they're going to be a little bit bigger. They'll be about 4 fingers in size. Now let's start our chain. This blanket will have 26 loops to work with, so our chain will be 26. So let me show you how to do that again. So here's our foundation loop. Okay, and we put it on top of the working yarn and pull another loop up. And we lay it flat, pinch and pull up, lay it flat, pinch and pull up, lay it flat. So we're going to do this until we have 26 loops in our chain. And as you go, again, you can kind of check to make sure you're making loops that are about 4 fingers to keep them consistent here. And if you lose track of how many you have, you can count the top edges. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and this last loop counts as 7. So let's keep going until we have 26. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26. Okay, I have 26. It's helpful to work on a large flat surface here so we don't like get the chain rolled up or twisted. We want to really make sure we don't twist our chain at the beginning here. So keep the same side up the whole time. And now that we've finished our chain, we're going to start our first foundation row of loops. And the best way that I like to do it to have the really pretty edge on our blanket is to actually flip this chain down on its face now. So we're going to flip it down, and you'll notice each chain has this little bar in the middle. So it's kind of hard to see with this fluffy yarn, but each chain has one of these bars. So now we're going to be working back the direction we came. So it's good to move our yarn over to the other side in the direction that we're going. Let me pull some out to work with here. Okay, so here's this first little bar under that chain. So we're going to reach underneath it and grab this yarn to pull up a new loop. Here we go. So there's that edge loop. That'll be the first one. This will be the second one. Okay, let's find the next bar. This little bar here. Reach underneath it to pull a new loop up. So these loops for the rest of the body, for the chain, our loops are about 4 fingers. The rest of them are going to be 2.5, maybe 3, maybe a snug 3. They're going to be a little bit smaller so that the blanket isn't too loose. But I also find you don't want them too small and too tight because then the blanket is kind of stiff. So there's kind of a scale of how tight or how loose you want your blanket to be, and you can control that by the size of your loops. So there's the next one. So we're just going to work our way back underneath each of these bars, adding a loop. And be careful not to skip any. When we're all done, we'll count how many loops to make sure we still have 26 loops. Okay, keep going. Okay, we're almost at the end here. Okay, let's make sure we don't miss that last one. There's 2 more here. Okay, here's that last one. Okay, so the reason I like to do this first row that way when we work into that chain is that when you look at it, now the bottom edge of this blanket is going to have this beautiful looking braid on it. So it'll have a really beautiful edge. And the way to continue that pretty braided edge up the sides of the blanket, the trick there is to always skip the first loop of every row. So we did this first row, we're going to work our way back the other direction. So again, it's good to have your yarn go back, put your yarn the direction that you're moving. So move my skein over to the other side now. And we're going to keep this yarn behind our loops. And we're not going to do the first loop. And that's going to be true for the whole blanket. We will skip the first loop. We'll pick it back up when we come back the other way. So we'll always do the last loop of every row, but we'll skip the first loop of every row. So when we start the new row, start with that second loop. Okay, and we're going to keep doing that. Reach into the loop and pull up a new one. Reach in, pull up. And it's also really important, especially this first row, sometimes these loops will want to twist on you. So it's important to make sure they're untwisted. So you can see every loop has 2 legs, a left and a right. And if you look, see the legs are twisted there. So untwist before you pull up a new loop. So check, not twisted. Pull up your new loop, and we'll just work like this all the way back across. And again, you can check the sizes of your loops, but every now and then check, make sure you're, like a tight 3, so 2.5 fingers or so. Oh, and make sure I already counted that there's 26 loops still. It's good, especially when you're first starting. At the end of every row, count to make sure you still have 26 loops every time. Make sure you're not skipping one. If you skip one, there is ways to fix it, go back and pick it up without undoing everything. But it's best to catch it first, because the fix sometimes isn't quite as pretty as it would have been. So I can make a tutorial at some point showing how to fix a dropped loop mistake. All right, here we are coming back to this last loop. Okay, now we can pick up that end loop. Okay. You can see this pretty braid. It's going to wrap right on up the sides of the blanket. It's going to be beautiful. Okay. And again, coming back, always change directions. Move your yarn to the other side. So you have it ready to go behind your loops. Okay, and coming back, again, we already just did this one, so skip the first. Start with that second loop. Keep working our way back. Okay, make sure they're not twisted. Pull it up. Okay, and kind of a tip for when you're technique for how to pull up the yarn. I reach in and I kind of anchor on this side so that when I'm pulling this loop up, I'm not pulling from this side that will tighten this loop. Kind of anchoring here and pulling from the loose working yarn over here. So I can kind of anchor it on the right, pull up from this side. Kind of use my pointer finger to hook it, and then my thumb to pull up a little more and get the right size loop. So once you kind of get a rhythm, you can really start to do that pretty quickly. So yeah, the things that determine like how tight or loose your blanket is the size of these loops, as well as how much gap is between each loop. So when you're carrying the yarn from one loop to the next, are you making it really loose back there? If you're making it super loose back there, it's gonna end up being, a big gap between them. But also if you make it too tight, it could be a little bit stiff. So kind of keep your tension even. A tip for that, if you want to lay out a tape measure, you can have like a tape measure out on your table if you want, to measure like what width of the blanket you want it to be, and to kind of always keep holding that blanket to that desired width, to kind of help keep the tension even throughout the blanket, so it's not going to taper tighter or wider as you change your tension throughout the blanket. Make sure to pick up that one from the row below. Okay, and now we're going back again. And again, beginning of the row, skip the first loop, start with the second, and going back the other way. Again, I hook it with my pointer, pull up with my thumb, hook with my pointer, pull up with my thumb, and then you can kind of get a rhythm going that way. Kind of untwist the loop, hook, pull up. All right, so now you kind of get the gist for how to knit each row. And it's also going to be important to know how to count how many rows you've done so that we know when to change our color. So I can show you how to do that now that we have a few rows done. When you knit in knitting, each stitch creates kind of a V. So you can kind of count down, go down from this loop here and see there's a V there. That's one loop, one stitch, another V, two stitch, another V, three stitches, and this loop makes it four. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4 rows have been done on this for here. So that will be useful for when you need to know when to change color. So now you know how to count stitches. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Make sure you're not counting, because here's kind of in between each row. So that's each column, I should say. So each column, if you don't know if you're, can't find the V, then start with the loop at the top and work your way down. You can see there's the V, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we've done 4 rows, at least on this half. Over here, we've only done 3. Haven't finished this row yet. So that's important. And then let me finish up with this ball of yarn, and then I can show you how to join 2 balls of the same color, as well as how to change colors. We'll cover that next. All right, here we are at the end. We have done, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 7.5 rows so far. This pattern, we're actually going to be doing 9 rows of this cranberry color first before we switch to do some ivory. So we still need to do a little bit more. So let's add some more cranberry. Get my next skein ready. Let's see, where is the end? Here we go. Hiding in there. Somewhere in there. Come on, where are you? Maybe this one. It's not supposed to be a center pole. What's going on here? There we go. Somewhere in there. There, we found it. Okay. Let's get the extra out of the way. All right, so we're going to be covering 3 different ways to join yarn. The easiest way is to just do a double knot, right? And this may be a good way if you just don't have any other supplies on hand, or if you're doing this with kids and you don't want to overcomplicate things or be using fire. You can just do a double knot. And you're going to have some tails, so you can trim those a little bit. Don't trim too close because it could unravel. You want to test it, really give it a tug to see if it's holding tight. And then you can trim a little bit. So you will have a little bit of a knot, and as you continue to knit, you can just try your best to get that knot to be at the back of the blanket, not in the front. So let's see. I don't know if that's going to quite land where I want it. Another way, let's see, let me undo it a little bit. Let's see if I can. Another option is to actually tie the knot after you knit in the back of the work, and then you know it's going to end up in the back. Let me see if I can show you that, and then you don't have to try to. Okay. Another option is to just knit till it's almost gone, leave a little in the back, and then with the new yarn, leave a little tail, but then go ahead and start knitting with the new yarn. And so there's no knot yet, but either when the blanket's done or now you can kind of flip it over a little bit, we can tie the knot now, and you'll know that the knot will be in the back and not in the middle of one of your nice loops here. So you can tie a double knot. So this method will leave a little bit of a tail. I mean, you can trim it to be short, but you'll still see a little bit of a little tails in the back of your blanket, and which isn't a big deal because, I mean, this yarn is so fluffy, it kind of hides stuff like that. So if you're not too worried about it, then that's the easiest way to go. But let me show you some other options. So you could also, another way, so after you do that knot, then to kind of hide the tails, you can actually tie some thread around here. So let's try that. Let me get some thread. Kind of have some red thread in a similar color here. Alrighty, so got my knot, and then you just take some thread and use it to kind of, what am I doing? Here we go. Tie a knot. And it'll get lost in the fluff of this yarn, so you won't even see it. And it'll still hold really strong. Let's see. Where's my knot? Here we go. So tie it really tight. Just do a couple knots. Make sure it's strong. So then you can do the same thing with the tail on this side, and then you can just trim your yarn. And you can also trim your threads here. You won't even see them hiding in there. Okay, so that's one way to kind of keep your tails a little bit more tidy, and you can go ahead and just continue knitting from there. It will be a little bit thicker, just for a stitch or two there, but this yarn hides things well. Okay, so that's another option. Okay, and then my favorite way, but also maybe you don't have a lighter handy, or you'd rather not play with fire, that or you're doing this with children, that's probably not the best bet. So let me show you the lighter method. I'll just cut this knot off for now. Okay, so the lighter method, so this yarn is made of polyester, and inside in the core is like this plastic core that you can, when you cut into it, you can feel it's a little bit firm, so you can feel that core in there. Let me get the fluff off the edges. So what we're going to do is use a lighter to actually heat up that core and then fuse them together, and that is like the perfect join. But it is, you know, using heat and fire, and it does create a little bit of a smell with the smoke, so just FYI. So I'm going to use this lighter to heat up the core of both sides, and then I'll fuse them together, and just be careful not to burn my fingers. I find that you do have to get both sides kind of hot, otherwise it doesn't really fuse very well. So I'm gonna check it carefully, make sure it's not too hot, and then once it's not too hot, you can really start to pinch down, and you can feel inside the core is kind of a little bit hard inside the fluff. There's a, you feel that plastic core in the middle. So really pinch it together, wait a few seconds while it cools off. Once it's starting to cool a little bit, and then we can test it out. I mean, give it a good tug and make sure it's strong before you continue on. And then that's like the perfect join. That's my favorite way to do it. You definitely want to kind of have a window open. It can be a little bit smelly with the smoke. So there we go. So that's my favorite way to join the yarn, but also a knot works, or using a thread to tie it together works as well. So pick which works for you. So that's how we join. If you're joining the same color, you can do that anywhere in the middle of the blanket. It's not a problem. And next, I'm going to show you how to change colors, which we have to do at the edge of the blanket. And I'll show you that in just a second. First, we need to finish up 9 rows of this cranberry color. All right, so now we have 9 rows of the cranberry completed. Let's double check. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rows. So now we get to do 2 rows of ivory. So let me get the next color ready. So the trick when we're changing colors is we will actually, instead of knitting this last row with red, we're going to go back 1. We'll actually do the last stitch with the new color. So let me And for this first join, I'm going to do the lighter method, and I can show you how to join with a knot, the next color change. So for doing the lighter method, the point when we're going to want to change the color is just behind this second to last loop. We'll leave a little bit, maybe like an inch or half an inch about here. That's where the color will change. Okay, and then I can just pull this one stitch out so I have a little more to work with when I do my joining of the yarn. Let's see, get some of that fluff off. And with the new color, sometimes you need to cut just a little bit off so that you can expose that core that we're going to be fusing. Okay, so now I've got my two colors, and let's join them together. Really squeeze and wait for it to cool off for just a second. Kind of roll it in your fingers a little bit. All right, let's check. Yep, we're good. All right, so now we can continue on with our new color. So let's do that second to last stitch again with the red. And now we're going to do this last stitch of this row with the white. And now we can begin knitting with the white. So again, skip that first stitch and do the second loop. Continue on with the ivory color. We're going to do 2 rows of ivory, and then we'll switch to the forest green. All right, here we are with our 2 rows of white done. 1, 2. And we're going to stop just before the last loop to change our color. And we're going to change to our forest green next. So let's get that ready. All right, so this time I'm going to join by just tying them together with a knot. So the easiest way to do that is actually tie the knot after we start the next color. So what we're going to do, we'll just leave a little bit of a tail, not too much, because the way I have this pattern written, we're going to use almost all this yarn, so don't waste too much, but we'll have a little bit of a tail to work with. And go ahead and just start pulling up with the new yarn and leave the other white back there. Okay, so we got that last loop on the edge, and then we're starting the new row. Just get a few loops done. And then we can kind of flip it over to the back, and we can join the yarn in the back. This way we know we're not going to have our knot end up in the front of the blanket. So now I can trim this white as well, leave a little bit to work with. And then we can tie a knot here in the back. Okay, I would do a double or triple knot. And you can get it kind of snug so it matches how tight each of these back bars is. So you don't want it too tight, but you also don't want it super loose. So kind of get it snug to match the tension of all the other stitches back here. Let's tie it pretty tight. We don't want it to come undone when you're washing it or using it. All right. It's pretty strong, but some brands might break if you pull on this too hard, so be careful. All right. So now we can double check. We still got our stitches are okay. Okay, it looks good in the front. And there's a knot in the back with a little extra. So this is where you can use some thread to tie it down if you want, and then trim the extra. Or you can just weave these ends in, kind of following the pattern of the other stitches. So you can just tuck those in. It's called weaving in ends. All right, and there's no green yet, so maybe I'll tuck this in later once we have some more green fabric to weave it in. So now we're going to do 8 rows of this forest green color. It should be pretty much exactly one skein. So the goal is just to use up this one skein of the green, and then we'll switch back to another 2 rows of the ivory. So let's work on using up this green skein. So if you have a different brand of yarn, then go for 8 rows. All right, I've now done 7 rows, and I'm getting towards the end of my skein here. If you ever want to know if you have enough to finish the next row, you're going to need about 3 lengths of the blanket worth of yarn. So if we stretch our blanket out widthwise here and kind of run the yarn along the length of it, or the width of it, I guess. So there's 1, 2, 3 lengths. I actually have about 4 lengths of yarn here, so that should be enough to finish this last row without running out. So I'm going to go ahead and do this row number 8, and then we will change our color back to ivory. All right, let's see. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rows are done. We're going to stop right before the last loop and switch back to ivory. Well, actually, while we're here, let's remember we had the last time we joined colors, we didn't weave in this green yet. Now that we actually have some green to hide it in, we can weave this end in. So there's not really any rule. You're just kind of tucking it in, find some stitch to follow so you can hide it. In this case, since it's where we're joining colors, you want to follow the same color. Just kind of tuck it in. All right, and kind of hide it there. So not too bad. I mean, it's not quite as clean as doing using the lighter method join, but it's not so bad. And it all kind of gets hidden in the fluff of these super soft blankets. All right, so anyways, let's get back to up here. Okay, and then I'm going to see a little closer. These end loops kind of roll around to the side, and that's normal. That's how we get that beautiful braided edge. But when we pick it up to do the stitch, you don't really want to twist it. You actually kind of want to bring it back this way versus that way. I kind of point my finger in there to pull up the next color. Okay, now let's go back. Okay, again, we're doing 2 rows of this ivory. All right, the 2 rows of ivory are done. Now I'm going to switch back to the cranberry again. For this panel of cranberry, we're going to do 10 rows. And now the blanket is starting to get pretty long. So while you're working on it, you can actually roll up the ends like that and continue working. So now you can still reach over your blanket as it gets bigger and bigger. Just keep rolling it. You can keep reaching for your loops here. All right, so 10 rows of cranberry. Real quick, I wanted to show you the edge loops on this side. So like I said, these the edges kind of curl over a little bit like this, and they create this beautiful braid. And that's because we've been skipping the first loop of every row. I think it creates a really much tidier edge when we do that. But to pick up this last stitch, because it's curled this way, we're going to pick it up and kind of curl it back to pick up that next loop here. And then again, carry the yarn back behind to start our next row. So that's how we're keeping these loops untwisted. Looks really nice. And you'll notice because we're only doing this end stitch every other row, we're only picking it up on when we finish a row, not when we begin. We end up having half as many stitches on the edge. So like the white here is 2 rows, but only 1 stitch on the edge, but it still lines up with the color, which is pretty nice. So let's continue on with our cranberry, and we'll go from there. All right, that's 10 rows of cranberry. Now we're going to do 2 more rows of ivory. And next, after those 2 rows of white, we're going to do another skein of forest. So it should be about 8 rows. All right, finishing up these 8 rows here. Oh yeah, that was pretty much exactly 1 skein, not much extra here. Each skein can have a little bit of variability in how much length you have as well. And how big you make your loops can change how fast you go through your yarn. But that worked out just right. Okay, now we're going to do the last 2 rows of ivory. And so I've just got a little bit left from that 1 skein of ivory. It should be just right to finish up these last 2 rows. All right, so I did this first row of the ivory, and then I can check to make sure I have enough of this skein to finish off my second row. So again, we can check by running the yarn like the width of the blanket. I need to have about 3 blanket widths of yarn to have enough to finish another row. And I have pretty much exactly 3 here. If you're concerned that you may not have enough to finish, you can make your loops just a little bit smaller this next row. You don't want it to be totally different than the rest of the blanket because that will look funny. But if you just want to eke out just a little bit more yarn, then you can adjust your loop sizes to be for this 1 row just a little bit smaller to have enough yarn to finish and not have to go back to the store and get a whole another skein of yarn for that. So I have exactly 3, so it's probably going to be enough. And we'll see in just a second. Oh yeah, just right. Still got a little bit extra. All right, look at that. Here we go. All right, so for the last panel of the cranberry, we're going to do 9 rows, and then we get to finally finish off and close off our final loops, and I'll show you how to do that when we get there. All right, here is the last 9 rows. Let's double check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 rows. Now we get to do what is called bind off, and that's where we will close off all these open loops so that the blanket doesn't unravel. So this is the final step. Let me get a little extra yarn out here. All right, so for binding off, we will need about 4 blanket widths length of yarn to finish it off. I definitely have a lot left here, so I know I have enough. But if you don't know if you have enough, you'll need about 4. You can test if you have 4 lengths of the blanket to be able to finish, because these last loops are going to be a little bit bigger than we've been doing the rest of the blanket. So first off, let's make our first loop. We're going to make it a little bigger, more like 4 fingers or so. And we're going to put this first stitch inside that edge stitch. There we go. And let's make 1 more stitch. We'll do the next one. Pull it up, make it a little bigger, about 4 fingers. And it goes inside the previous loop. And then we pull it over. Let's keep going. We'll do 1 at a time. So we do 1 loop, make it bigger, goes inside the previous loop. So we're starting to create this pretty chain that we had running up the side of the blanket is now wrapping around the top edge. And we'll keep working our way across. So pull up a loop, goes inside the previous one and pull it down. And so we're making these last loops a little bit bigger because if it's too small, this edge here at the top will be really tight and the blanket will stretch everywhere except for the edge. So you want to make sure to have a nice stretchy edge to match the stretchiness of the rest of the blanket. So, and if you want to just kind of lay it out slightly stretched so you know that you have big enough loops up here on the top. So you can kind of test it out as you go. Make sure these loops are reaching from one stitch to the next. And you can adjust. You also don't want them huge. You don't want them too big either, but you can adjust as you go. And if you feel like you really, you want to adjust those, you can always go back a few loops. You can pull them out and you can adjust going forward. So you can always go backwards a little bit if you need to. Okay, big loop, pull it through. 4. Let's just keep working our way across. Okay, last loop, pull it up and through. And actually we're going to trim the yarn here. And instead of leaving this last one a loop, we will pull it through. And kind of tighten it up a little bit. And there's the end. And then, all right, now we need to try to hide this tail. So I'm going to put it back behind this edge loop. And if you want, you can just kind of weave this in and call it good. Or if you want to do the lighter method, we can trim this even shorter and then fuse it into the side of one of these strands here. If you're going to fuse into the side, you're really going to have to try to part through the fluff to find that core again. So let's see, I'm going to find a spot on this strand here. If I can dig through to find the core. Okay, I can kind of feel it a little bit. And let me trim this tail to about the length I need to fasten it there. Get the fluff off. All right, so let's find a spot in there. Okay, yeah, fusing to the sides is a little harder than it is just fusing two cores together. So let's see. Okay, and I'm only going to be able to melt this end here. Okay, let's see if I can get the two cores to fuse one into the side. So you can kind of pinch it in there. It smells funny. Okay, pinch it in there. Once it's cool, give it a test. See if it's gonna stick. Okay, good. Sometimes it won't quite stick and you have to try again, but I think I got it. Okay, so that's a pretty neat edge. Now, if some of the loops are kind of uneven, you can just pull them around because they're all interconnected. So even it out. Great. All right, so now we can go back to that first tail from when we started our chain. We can hide this one as well. So I like to kind of loop it up into the first side loop and back. It's not really a right or wrong way to do this, but that just kind of strengthens that corner a little bit. And let's see. Okay. Okay, corner looks pretty good. So you can, now we can do the same thing. We can fuse this in somewhere to the side, or you can just weave it in and call it good. I'll just weave it today. All right, tuck it in. Alrighty. Looks pretty good. Okay. Our blanket is all done. And that's it, your beautiful hand knit blanket. Wasn't that so satisfying? There's just something so special about making something cozy with your hands. If you love making this, then you'll definitely want to check out my 12 Days of Christmas Patterns collection. It's full of striped, colorful designs using this exact technique. I'll link it down below so you can get started right away. If you want more cozy blanket tutorials like this one, then don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell. Thanks so much for watching. Happy knitting, and I'll see you in the next one.